I was the diary forgotten in the attic, and I keep the truth that destroyed a family. Have you ever imagined what a simple dusty notebook could hide? What if it held words never spoken, secrets buried for decades, capable of destroying or freeing an entire family? I was just a diary, forgotten in the attic. But inside me lives the truth that no one had the courage to tell. If you have the courage to listen, I need to open these pages. I had been there for so long that I could no longer remember the sound of a human voice, the warmth of a curious hand, the smell of someone other than mold and longing. It was always the same cold darkness, the creaking of wood in the windy early mornings, and that beam of light that filtered through the crack in the roof, drawing a timid rectangle on the floor full of boxes. I was just a notebook with a faded blue cover, the edges eaten away by time and words trapped between the yellowed lines, forgotten like a bad dream. Forgotten like her, Isadora. Isadora wrote to me with trembling fingers and a boiling heart. Each word she wrote to me was a sacred outburst, as if only I could understand her. She hid me under the floorboards, as if hiding a sin, a love, a parallel life. In those days, between 1972 and 1975, Isadora was a wife, a mother, a woman admired in the small town of Ouro Velho, where everyone knew each other, where every secret had to be buried well. She trusted me more than anyone else in the world. And when everything fell apart, she forgot me too, as if erasing her story was the only way to keep on living. Decades passed, and I, the diary, remained there, breathing dust and loneliness, until one day, something changed. The house no longer belonged to Isadora, but to her grandson, Caio. He was young, with stormy eyes and a silence that said more than words. He arrived at the house he inherited after his father's recent death, wanting to discover who he really was, and without knowing it, he was about to discover much more than he expected. It was on a rainy afternoon, with the sky crying over the roof of the house, that Caio pushed open the attic door for the first time. He climbed the creaky wooden stairs with slow steps, as if he didn't want to disturb the ghosts. Each step seemed to whisper old memories, as if the house were alive, waiting for him. When the light of the lantern trembled over the old boxes and furniture covered in dirty sheets, his eyes fell on a crack in the floor, between two planks. He knelt down, carefully pulled it open, and there, among the dust and silence, he found me. His hands hesitated before touching me, as if they knew I was hiding something too big. He picked me up like someone finding a relic, blew the dust off the cover, and opened the first page. Isadora's handwriting was still there, firm and delicate, as if it had been written yesterday. "If anyone ever finds these words, please forgive me." Caio read it in silence, his eyes wide and his heart racing. And there, in that moment, the past began to return, like a river breaking its banks. "Forgive what, Grandma?" he whispered, as if she could hear him from the other side of time. He took me with him to the old guest room. Everything was old, as if time had stopped. The crocheted bedspread on the bed, the stained mirror, the black and white photo of Isadora, still young, with a restrained smile. Caio sat up slowly, turned on a lamp, and opened the next page. He began to read aloud, hesitantly, as if he wanted to feel the words entering his ears, piercing his chest. Today I dreamed about him again. About his eyes, about his hands, about the way he said my name as if it were a secret. Caio stopped reading. He took a deep breath, and then he closed his eyes, trying to understand why it hurt so much, even though it was about someone he didn't even know. He flipped through more pages, as if he were drowning in a memory that didn't belong to him, but that called to him strongly. Was she in love with another man? He murmured, his voice almost fading. The next few pages were filled with confessions. Isadora wrote about a hidden love, about nights when she would leave the house saying she was going to church, but instead she would meet this mysterious man in the woods by the river. She described the encounters with desperate sweetness, as if each moment had been stolen from the world. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was betraying not only my husband, but my daughter, my home, everything I was, but it was only with him that I felt alive. Caio put his hand to his chest. He felt a twinge, as if those words were being written there, at that moment, by someone who was still bleeding. "Grandma, who was that man?" Why has no one ever talked about this? He read for hours. Time seemed to stand still in the room. Outside, the rain beat down on the roof like a crying clock, marking each second he spent immersed in the confessions of the woman he thought he knew only as a serene and religious grandmother. The woman who baked bread on Sundays and called him my ray of sunshine. But there, in the pages of that diary, she was another woman. A woman divided, suffocated by obligations, in love with someone she could never love in the light of day. And the diary trembled in her hands because I knew this was only the beginning. The most devastating truth was yet to come. Caio couldn't sleep that night. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than it should have, as if time was trying to remind him that from that moment on, he was no longer the same. He got out of bed, went to the kitchen and made himself a bitter coffee, the kind that makes your stomach hurt but keeps your soul awake. With the cup in his hands, he returned to the bedroom and looked at me, leaning on the antique wooden desk. "What else are you hiding, huh?" He whispered, looking at the worn blue cape as if expecting an answer. He was 28 years old, but that night he looked younger. Or older. It was hard to tell. The inheritance of the house had come to him after the death of his father, Enrique, Isadora's only son. But the bond between them had never been close. Caio had always felt that there was a veil of silence between them, something that prevented any real intimacy. And now, reading his grandmother's diary, he began to understand why. The next morning, the sky was clear, but Caio's chest was still cloudy. He sat down at the kitchen table and opened the diary again. The next page began with a date written in delicate letters, June 3, 1973. He took a deep breath before continuing to read. "He waited for me in the woods for over an hour. I didn't go. I was afraid. Afraid of myself, of what I was feeling, afraid of losing what I had built. But when I got home, I saw my reflection in the mirror and realized I had been lost for a long time." Caio ran his hand through his hair. With each page, the portrait he had of his grandmother faded, like paint washed away by the rain. That strong, always serene woman now appeared before him, fragile, divided, in love and scared. And that hurt. Not because he judged her, but because he finally saw her as a real person. "Why has no one ever told me about this?" he wondered aloud. Did my father know? It was strange to imagine that his father, so closed off, so rigid, could have been raised by a woman with such a broken heart. He returned to the attic that day, searching for more clues. He rummaged through boxes, opened photo albums, found letters exchanged between family members, but nothing that spoke of this mysterious man. It was as if he had never existed outside the pages of the diary. That same afternoon, Caio decided to visit his great-aunt, Lourdes, Isadora's younger sister, who lived in a modest house a few blocks away. She was almost 80 years old, but had the lucidity and sharp gaze of someone who always knew more than she was saying. "Lourdes, can I ask you something kind of delicate?" he said, already sitting on the flowery sofa in the living room. "As long as you don't ask me for money, you can," she replied with a crooked smile, but serious eyes. Caio hesitated, holding the diary inside his backpack, as if it were burning. "Do you remember if Grandma had any, I don't know, any close friends in the 70s? Anyone she saw often?" Lourdes looked at him for long seconds. The smile disappeared. "Why are you asking this, Caio? I found her diary in the attic of the house. There are things in there, things I never imagined. And there is a man she loved." Lourdes closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were full of tears. "Did she tell you about Vinicius?" The name hung in the air like a forgotten perfume, ancient, sweet, and bitter at the same time. "No, he has no name. Just stories. But who was he?" Lourdes took a deep breath and settled into her chair. Vinicius was Isadora's husband's younger brother. His great-grandfather. He lived with them for a while when he lost everything in a fire. He was an artist, always with his head in the clouds. And yes, Isadora loved him. I knew. I saw it. But she never talked about it with me. Never. Was she happy with him? I don't know. I think so, for a while. But hidden happiness weighs, Caio. She carried it alone. On the way home, Caio felt a tightness in his chest that he couldn't explain. That story, which was beginning to seem like an old romance, was now a part of him. Somehow, he felt that forbidden love still echoed in his own life, as if the untold pains had turned into hereditary shadows. In the evening, he began writing again. Not in the diary, but in a new notebook. Today I found out that my grandmother loved a man who wasn't my grandfather. And for the first time, I don't judge her for it. Because I understand. Because I know what it's like to want something you can't have. Because maybe I'm hiding parts of myself too. He closed the notebook and looked at me, as if he expected me to approve. And if I could speak, I would have said, "Yes, Caio, writing is opening wounds carefully. And that is why I am still here." Her handwriting was round, tilted to the right, with those little flourishes on the G and the Y that looked like signatures on each line. It was impossible not to imagine Isadora there, sitting at the foot of the bed, writing by the light of a lamp, with her eyes wet and her heart caught between fear and hope. Each word was a surrender. And Caio now not only read, he heard his grandmother talking to him between the pages. It was a gray afternoon when he sat on the living room couch and began to read aloud. The soft echo of his voice filled the room as if the house, long silent, was breathing again. He looked at me like someone looking at the sunset for the last time. And when he touched my hand, I knew. I could never forget that. Caio paused for a moment, pressing his fingers against his eyes. Why did you write all this, but never tell anyone? Why carry this love only on the pages? Why hide what made you alive? It was like talking to a ghost who still had so much to say. The diary progressed, and with it, the intensity of the words. Isadora spoke of Vinicius with an almost adolescent passion, but marked by the weight of reality. They would see each other in secret, in an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where Vinicius used to paint. He painted my portrait in silence. He said he wanted to immortalize my eyes, because they were where the courage he never had lived. Caio stood up, walked around the room as if carrying something very heavy on his chest. He picked up his cell phone and called Lourdes again. "Auntie, do you know if that shed that Grandma talks about in her diary still exists? Where Vinicius used to paint?" On the other end of the line, Lourdes took a while to respond. "I think so. It's near the train line, after the fig tree curve. It's abandoned. But I never went back there." Without thinking much, Caio grabbed his car keys and drove to the place. The place was as described, old, forgotten, with broken windows and a smell of rust. He entered slowly, the cement floor creaking under his steps. At the back of the warehouse, a large screen leaned against the wall, covered by a stained sheet. He carefully pulled the fabric away, and there she was. Isadora. Young, beautiful, intense. The portrait was raw, honest, real. It wasn't an idealized painting. It was as if Vinicius had painted her soul. Her eyes seemed alive, shining with something Caio had never seen in her, not even in old photos. "My God, Grandma, he really saw you." The tears came without warning. Caio sat on the floor and cried like someone who was encountering for the first time the past that shaped his own story. Because that woman in the painting was not just his grandmother. She was a woman in love, divided, alive. And that changed everything. He returned home at dusk, his heart aching. He opened the diary again, searching for answers, trying to understand how that love story could have ended in silence. The next pages were stained with drops of water. Maybe tears. Maybe rain. It was impossible to know. That night, he asked me to run away. He said that love was not worth hiding, that it was better to be happy for a moment than unhappy for a lifetime. I didn't answer. I closed my eyes and let the silence decide for me. Caio read that out loud, his voice choked. He paused, staring at the ceiling, and whispered, "You said no, right, Grandma? And then you spent your whole life wondering if you had done the right thing." A few more pages and the doubt became certainty. He left. He didn't leave an address, not a word. Just a letter, which I burned without reading out of cowardice. And a painting, which I hid in the shed. He said it was so I would remember who I was, in case I ever forgot. Caio closed the diary for a moment. He took a deep breath. That story was now his too. It carried Isadora's blood, Vinicius's intensity, and the questions that no one else could answer. At night, sitting on the porch of the house, looking at the starry sky, he began to write again in his own notebook. Today I discovered the face of my grandmother's hidden love. He painted her like someone writing a poem with paintbrushes. And she loved him like someone trying to hide the sun with their hands. I am made of this light that no one has seen. At that moment, Caio understood that perhaps the diary was not just a settling of accounts with the past. Perhaps it was a passage, a bridge, an invitation for him to be more truthful with his feelings, with his own story. And the diary, vibrated inside. Because finally, after so many years of silence, my handwriting was beginning to free hearts that didn't even know they were trapped. The first time Isadora's eyes met Vinicius's was on a Sunday afternoon in 1972. The house was full. There was laughter in the kitchen, the smell of bread baking in the oven, and the radio playing a slow song by Caio Peixoto. Vinicius had just arrived from Sao Paulo after losing everything in a fire in his studio. He was the younger brother of her husband, Lauro, a proper, hard-working, devoted man, but dry and always distant. Vinicius entered the room with tired eyes and an almost childish expression of someone who felt out of place. He carried a leather briefcase with some scorched canvases, wore a wrinkled white shirt, and his gaze was that of someone who had already lost everything, except his sensitivity. Isadora looked at him as if she recognized something she still couldn't name. And he, when looking at her, lingered half a second longer than would be socially acceptable. And in that second, everything changed. "You must be the famous Isadora," he said, with a half-smile, extending his hand. "And you? The artist's brother. I've heard a lot about you," she replied, squeezing his hand firmly, but preventing her eyes from betraying what her heart was beginning to sense. Vinicius stayed in the back room, where the sun would shine early and the sparrows would nest in the window. It was supposed to be a stay of a few weeks, just until he could get back on his feet, find another job, maybe rent a small room in the city. But the weeks turned into months, and his presence began to infiltrate the house like a constant breeze, discreet but impossible to ignore. He spoke little, but when he did, it was as if he touched something hidden inside Isadora. One day, when he saw her folding clothes on the balcony, he approached slowly and asked, bluntly, "You always seem so calm. Is this real or is it just practice?" She laughed, surprised. "Maybe it's practice. Maybe I've forgotten what it's like to not be calm." He looked at her with genuine interest, not intrusive, but with a kind of tenderness that Lauro had never shown. "Have you ever drawn someone with words, Vinicius?" she asked, picking up a freshly ironed shirt and folding it with precision. "No, but I think I'm about to start." That phrase reverberated inside her for days. Little by little, the meetings began to happen in silence. There were glances that lasted longer than was acceptable, conversations in the half-light in the kitchen after everyone was asleep, the exchange of books with notes hidden between the pages. He gave her a notebook and said, Write everything you can't say." And that's how I was born. From her hands, guided by a forbidden, restless, and impossible to ignore feeling. At first, she wrote about how she felt alive just by hearing his footsteps in the hallway. Then, about how she hated the fact that she was married to a man who no longer saw her as a woman, only as the mother of his daughter and the caretaker of the house. "Vinicius sees me, hears me, notices me. Is this wrong?" she wrote, tears blurring the ink. Vinicius, in turn, painted her in secret. A line here, another there. Her face began to appear on canvases hidden in the shed. For him, Isadora was the only beautiful thing that still made sense after the loss of everything. But the fear was constant. "You know this can't go on," she said one night as she washed the dishes and he watched her leaning against the doorframe. "I know, but I also know that I've never felt so close to anyone." She stopped, hands wet, and looked at him with teary eyes. "If I told you I was thinking about running away with you, would you believe me?" He approached, slowly, as if afraid of ruining the moment with a sudden gesture. "I would believe it, but I don't know if they would let you be happy, Isadora. The world is not kind to women who choose their hearts." She looked away, swallowing the bitter truth. And then came the kiss. On a stormy night, when the power went out and the house slept in silence. They were in the living room, too close. He placed a blanket over her shoulders, and she smiled gratefully. The touch of their hands was light, but full of everything they had never said out loud. And when their lips met, it was as if time had stopped to give permission for that moment. "This will destroy us," she whispered, leaning her forehead against his. "Or it will save us," he replied. But reality was relentless. Isadora had a young daughter, a husband who supported her, a house that demanded her presence. Running away seemed impossible, and staying hurt. So they made do with what little they had: secret conversations, quick touches, letters with no recipient. That's when she wrote, "If this love is a sin, then may God punish me with it every day of my life. Because with him, I am more myself than I have ever been." Caio read all this with a heavy heart, like someone watching a film whose tragedy he already knows. He saw in Isadora's eyes, in her precisely drawn words, a woman who fought to exist in a world that only allowed her to obey. And he saw in Vinicius a broken man, but whole when he had her around. "You deserve to have experienced this love," Caio said in a low voice, closing the diary for a moment. But the world was not prepared for them. And soon, everything would begin to fall apart. The days became little traps for Isadora. The routine, once predictable, was now a silent game between desire and guilt. Every step taken around the house was measured with caution, every word in front of Loro was filtered, every look at Vinicius was a desperate attempt to pretend that there was nothing there, when everything there was love. The shed, previously used only by Vinicius to store his paints and canvases, had become their refuge. It was there, among stained brushes, the smell of solvent and curtains of late afternoon light, that they allowed themselves to be who they were, even if only for a few minutes. And it was there, on an afternoon when the city was sleeping under the stifling summer heat, that the first promise was made. "If one day all this ends, if I disappear, or if you don't recognize me anymore, promise you'll remember what we were here for?" Isadora asked, her eyes moist, sitting on a blanket on the floor, her hair loose and undone by the wind that came in through the high windows. Vinicius stopped painting, wiped his hands on his apron and knelt before her. "I won't forget even if I lose my memory. You're in my hands, in my smell, in my paints. You're even in my silences." She touched his face as if memorizing a texture, and he held her hand with tears in his eyes. "And you, will you continue loving me if I don't have the courage to be with you?" she asked, her voice fragile. "I will. Even if you choose another life. Even if you never look at me the way you do now. Loving you is the only certainty I have." At that moment, thunder rumbled in the distance, as if the sky responded to the intensity of what they felt. And they embraced with the urgency of those who know that time is their enemy. The nights that followed were silent, but full of worries. Isadora would return home with his scent on her skin, with his whispers still alive in her ears. During dinner with Loro and her daughter, Clara, she would find herself wandering. She would see Vinicius' face in the reflection of the glass, hear his muffled laughter in the sound of the spoon hitting the plate. And she felt like a traitor for it. But she couldn't stop. "You're distant, I say," Loro commented one night, while she was washing the dishes. She faked a smile. "Just tired. It's been really hot." He nodded, but he didn't believe her. Loro wasn't stupid. He knew something had changed. He started leaving work earlier, observing more. One day, he arrived in time to see her leaving through the back with a book in her hands, the same one Vinicius had lent her weeks before. Isadora, on the other hand, lived in a state of alert. Every miscalculated step was a risk. Every smile that escaped at the wrong moment could be a trigger. But still, she returned to the warehouse. She needed those moments like someone needs air. It was on a Saturday morning that Vinicius took courage. "Come with me," I say. "Let's go. It doesn't have to be now. But in a week, a month. Give me a sign. Tell me you're going." She stood in silence, looking out the dirty window of the shed at the train tracks that cut across the horizon. "And my daughter? Take her. Or leave it to me if necessary. I'll take care of it." The three of us can have a new life." She turned around, startled. "You say that like it's easy." "It's not. But it's possible. What do you feel when you're with me, Isadora? Do you really think that happens twice in a lifetime?" She lowered her eyes. Tears flowed without warning. "I feel scared. Because with you I am real. And I don't know how to live being real all the time. I was trained to lie elegantly." Vinicius hugged her tightly, as if he could protect her even from herself. "Then let me be your shelter. Even if only for a while." That day, they made love for the first time. Slow, painful, unforgettable. There was no lust there was surrender. Whispered promises, promises that would never be signed in a notary's office, but that would mark the soul forever. She wrote on me that same night, her fingers still trembling. Today, my body was not just mine. It was his. And I have no regrets. If I die tomorrow, I will die knowing that I truly lived for a day. But real life started knocking on the door. The following week, Lauro found a scarf belonging to Vinicius in the shed. He recognized it immediately. It had his initials hand embroidered on it, a gift from Isadora herself years before, but which he had given to his brother. His suspicion turned into certainty. Lauro didn't shout. He didn't fight. He was a cold man. He planned in silence. Isadora felt the air in the house change. Clara, her daughter, started asking strange questions. Vinicius, increasingly restless, started to move away. And one day, without a letter, without warning, he disappeared. She waited for days. She went to the shed. She called. She wrote. She cried. Nothing. Just silence. And me. She wrote to me one last time. He's gone. And here I am, living a life that's no longer mine. And maybe it never was. Keep this for me. Because I don't have the strength anymore. And then he hid me between the floorboards. He left me there. With all the truths. With all the sighs. Caio closed the diary tightly, as if it physically hurt him. He cried. You were so brave, Grandma. And so alone. And there, through his tears, he promised himself, this story would no longer live in the dark. The smell of fresh coffee, the sound of silverware hitting plates, the sound of a knife cutting bread, everything was familiar in that house, but nothing was more real. Ever since Vinicius disappeared without a trace, Isadora moved like a well-dressed ghost. Sundays, which used to be filled with laughter and unhurried conversation, became silent ceremonies, where every gesture was rehearsed, and every word carried the weight of a poorly kept secret. Clara, now 7 years old, sat next to her mother and drew small, invisible flowers on the tablecloth with her finger. Lauro read the newspaper as if he wanted to hide behind it. Isadora served lunch with the same delicacy as always, but her soul was elsewhere. The chicken is great, Isadora, he said, without taking his eyes off his economics notebook. Thank you, Lauro, she replied, forcing a smile, while her mind relived the last time Vinicius' eyes met hers. It was like living in two worlds. In the outside world, she was the exemplary wife, the devoted mother, the woman who knew the place that had been imposed on her. In the inside world, she was a broken woman, who went to sleep with the memory of a kiss and woke up with guilt embedded in her chest. Caio read these pages with a heavy heart. Isadora accurately described the details of everyday life that, to anyone else, would seem perfect, but for her, was a varnished prison. Today I smiled at my neighbor. She said she thought I was radiant. I wanted to laugh, because what I have inside me is tiredness and longing. In one of the harshest passages, she wrote, My daughter smiled at me today. She said that when she grows up she wants to be just like her mommy. And I smiled back. But inside, I asked God not to. Caio closed the diary for a moment, holding back tears. He couldn't stop thinking about the strength it took to smile so much, lie so much, endure so much. That woman who raised him with sweetness had hidden an entire ocean behind her calm gaze. He decided to visit Lourdes again. He needed to understand better. Did she change after he disappeared? He asked, sitting at the kitchen table, while Lourdes stirred the tea with a silver spoon. Yes. She became quieter, more careful with everything, as if she was afraid of breaking it. Even the way she folded the clothes changed. She started to measure each step, Caio. Did you know she kept writing in her diary for a while? Lourdes nodded. I knew, but I never read it. She only showed it to me once. She said that if I died, I should burn it. I promised, but I didn't have the courage. I never found it. Caio smiled sideways. Good thing. She needed to be heard. On the way home, Isadora's words echoed in her mind. People say you should fight for what you love, but they don't tell you what to do when love becomes a memory. He opened the diary that night and continued reading. There was a passage that made him stop for long minutes. Lauro never asked me. I think he knew, but he chose silence. And in return, he offered me stability. Our house was clean, our daughter fed, our clothes ironed. And the emptiness between us, well, it grew slowly. So slowly that no one saw it. The pain of renunciation was in every line. But what hurt Caio the most was realizing that the woman who rocked him as a child, who lovingly made cheese bread, who taught him to see poetry in simple things, had felt invisible all her life. The following Sunday, Caio returned to the same table where Isadora served lunch in silence. Now, he was the only one left there. The house was dusty, but he prepared lunch anyway. He put the plate in her place, his favorite cup next to it, and ate in silence. Just like she did. And then, in a low voice, he read one of the passages aloud. I have become an expert at smiling. Smiling at the grocery store. Smiling at the priest. Smiling at my husband's family. Each smile a nail in the cap of my true self. And he cried. He remembered how she laughed at everyone. How serene she seemed even in difficult moments. And he understood. It was all rehearsal. All performance. Because inside, she was still in the shed, among paintbrushes and promises. He went back to writing in his notebook. Today I ate at the place where she lied every Sunday. But not with anger. With love. Because now I understand. Her lie was a way of protecting everyone. Including me. That night, before he went to sleep, he looked at the diary on the table and whispered, Grandma, if I had met you on these pages before, I would have hugged you more often. I would have asked you questions. I would have really seen you. And I, the diary, understood right there. That was what she wanted. For someone to see. For someone to know. For someone to break the silence. And now, he was doing just that. It was on a page hidden between two others that Caio found the revelation. It had no date. Just a simple title, written in smaller letters, as if she wanted to hide from herself what she was going to confess there, the son I could not have. He took a deep breath, as if he needed to prepare his body for what was to come. And he read, in a low voice, in an almost reverent tone. Today, I woke up with a queasy feeling in my stomach, like in the first days of love. But this time, it wasn't passion. It was a delay. For weeks. Then 6. I did the math, and cried in the bathroom with my hands on my face, afraid of what this meant. I was pregnant, and the father wasn't Lauro. Caio put his hand over his mouth. His heart raced, as if a wave of truth had invaded the room where he was. A pregnancy, a child, a secret that changed everything. Grandma, why didn't you ever tell anyone about this? He whispered, his eyes filling with tears. She went back to reading. The writing was shakier, the ink thicker. It was as if Isadora was crying as she wrote. I thought about running away. I thought about telling Vinicius everything. But he had already left. And I didn't know where to find him. I thought about telling Lauro, saying it was his, moving on, but I couldn't. My body knew it wasn't true. And I couldn't carry that lie in my arms. She described the following weeks with brutal care. The hidden nausea, the looser clothes, the suspicious looks from her neighbor, the anguish of waiting for the right moment, which never came. Clara started to notice that I was sleeping more, that I was crying alone in the kitchen. One day she asked me, Mommy, are you going to die? I smiled. I said no. But inside, I felt like a part of me was already gone. Caio got up from the couch. He needed to walk. His body ached as if he himself had experienced that anguish. He picked up his cell phone and called Lourdes again. Andy, I need to ask you something very serious. Caio, are you okay? Grandma, oh, did she get pregnant with Vinicius? There was a long silence on the other end. The kind of silence that doesn't deny. It only prepares. Yes. My God. And what happened to the baby? She lost. Caio sat down, feeling a huge weight on his shoulders. How? I don't know the details. She only told me later. She said that one night she bled so much that she thought she was going to die. But she didn't tell anyone. She cried in silence. She buried the secret deep in her chest. And no one ever suspected? No. She was good at hiding it. It was what she knew best. Caio hung up with his heart in pieces. He went back to the diary and continued reading. It was a girl. I felt it. An instinct, a certainty. I dreamed about her one night. She had eyes just like Vinicius. She called me softly, Mommy, Mommy, and then she disappeared into a field of sunflowers. He couldn't hold back his tears. Every sentence seemed to pierce his soul. I wanted to die. Because losing a child is different from losing a loved one. We can remember love fondly. But a child who never came into the world, we carry that as a living absence. Like a name that was never said out loud. Caio sat on the floor of the living room, the diary on his lap. He looked at the bookshelf where the old family photos were. He saw the image of Isadora smiling on a random Christmas, with Clara still a child. He thought about how she smiled even though she carried so much inside. He wrote in his own notebook, "Today I discovered that my grandmother was a mother twice. But she only raised one daughter. The other was kept inside her like a promise that could not be fulfilled. And I am the heir to that silence." Later, Isadora wrote about the day she decided to erase all memories of her pregnancy. She hid her clothes, burned her notes, and threw away the amber bracelet she had secretly bought for the child. I buried my belly with the same coldness with which I serve breakfast. Because I learned to survive this way, by keeping quiet, silencing what screams, swallowing what no one wants to hear. Caio stared at that page for hours. He wanted to hug her. He wanted to tell her that everything was okay. That she was strong, but she didn't need to be so strong. That she deserved to cry in someone's arms. But she didn't. And now all that was left was him, and me, and the diary. That night he did something symbolic. He picked a flower, walked to the back garden, and dug a small hole. He buried the flower there, gently, as if giving a name to someone who has never been named. This is the symbolic grave of the daughter you never got to raise, Grandma. She has a place now. And a name, Isadora. Because you said she appeared in a field of sunflowers. And that's what Aurora is, the light that comes after the darkest night. And in that gesture, something inside him was also healed. Because now, the secret was no longer a hidden burden. It was a truth with space. With a name. With love. The last pages of the diary had a different atmosphere. Isadora's handwriting seemed slower, more spaced out, as if each letter was written with regret, with a delicacy that required care even to exist on paper. It was as if she knew that when she reached the end of that notebook, she would be closing not only a cycle, but a part of herself that would never return. Caio turned the penultimate page with trembling hands. He no longer knew what to expect. After the revelation of the pregnancy and the loss, any truth seemed possible. But what he found there was not a story, it was a gesture, a symbol, a mystery. On the final page, there was just one line. Just one. At the top of the page, a name written in blue pen, in large, almost uncertain letters. And just below, the same name crossed out hard, so many times that the paper tore a little. The name? Caio froze. Henry? My father. The same name, and written by her. Isadora. Her grandmother. He remained silent for long minutes, trying to understand. Why would Isadora write her own son's name on the last page of a diary where she confided a forbidden love, a hidden pregnancy, and such deep pain? And why cross it out so hard? He picked up his cell phone and called Lourdes once more. "Auntie, did you know that my father's name is crossed out in the diary? Henry's name?" "Yes." Silence. "Did she scratch?" "Yes." And with great force. It almost tore the page. Lourdes sighed on the other end of the line, as if she had been holding onto a truth for a long time. Caio, there's something you might need to know. What? For a long time, there was a doubt that Isadora never confirmed. Not even for me, but that I carried in silence. What doubt lured? If Enrique was really Loro's son. The world seemed to spin slowly. Caio was speechless. His heart was beating loudly in his chest, like a war drum. He looked back at the crossed-out name. Now it made sense. Total sense. Are you telling me that my father could have been Vinicius' son? Yes. We were never sure. But the dates. Isadora never admitted it. But that look she had when she talked about Enrique, it was different. More protective. More painful. Like someone who holds something greater than love itself. Caio sat on the floor of the living room, with his back to the sofa. He stared at the sheet of paper with the name crossed out as if he were facing a sentence. His father, a man so reserved, so hard, so closed off, who had grown up believing he was the fruit of a common marriage, of a traditional relationship, when, in fact, he could have been the result of a suffocated love story. Forbidden, beautiful, tragic. She went back to her diary, trying to find more clues. But there were none. This was the last page. The rest of the notebook was blank, as if Isadora had decided that some truths should not be written, only felt, or carried with her until the end. Caio took his own notebook and began to write with a trembling hand. Today I looked at my father's name like never before. Not as the austere man who raised me, but as the boy who was perhaps born from the most impossible love my grandmother had ever experienced. And I realized that he carried in his body the longing for a man he had never met. Maybe that was why he was so closed off. Maybe that was why he loved me in such a restrained way. He remembered a night when he was a child, when he had cried because he was afraid of sleeping alone. His father came into the room, sat at the foot of the bed, but did not hug him. He said, "Fear passes, Caio. We survive. We always survive." At the time, Caio thought it was cold, but now he understood. He was a father who never knew how to be a son fully. Maybe because he never felt like he belonged in the home where he grew up. That morning, Caio dreamed of Isadora. She was sitting in a field of sunflowers, wearing a light blue dress. She was holding a photograph in her hands, but he couldn't see who was in it. She looked at him and smiled with silent tenderness, as if she knew everything, and said, "Now you know, and I can rest." When he woke up, he felt a strange peace. Painful, but peaceful. As if, by understanding the story, he had finally freed himself from it. Later, he returned to the last page of the diary. He touched the scratched-out name with his fingers. The texture of anger, of fear, of regret, and of love. Because only those who feel too much would scratch like that. He decided not to try to fix the page. He didn't paste it, he didn't rewrite it. He left the name as it was, torn, imperfect, human. And he wrote in his own notebook, "She crossed you out, Dad, but not because she hated you. Maybe because she was afraid of losing you. Maybe because she couldn't tell that you were made of a love that no one could see. But now I see, I know, and I forgive you, and her too." And that night, he slept with the diary on his chest, like someone who embraces the past to let the present breathe. Caio spent the next few days not knowing exactly what to do. The truth weighed on his chest like an anchor. The diary now slept next to his bed, as if it were a warm, living body, breathing memories. He reread it in excerpts, looking for something that could ease the weight of the revelation, but all he found was more pain, more silence, more absence. Until he decided he couldn't keep it alone anymore. It was on a cloudy Sunday afternoon that he invited his mother, Marina, Isadora's daughter-in-law, and his Aunt Clara, his father's sister, for coffee at the old house. Clara didn't know anything yet. Marina only suspected. The table was set, the smell of cornmeal cake filled the air, just like in Isadora's time. Everything seemed normal. But what Caio was carrying in his arms would forever change what that family thought of themselves. He took a deep breath, looking at the two of them. "I need to talk to you about Grandma's diary." Marina's eyes widened. Clara smiled innocently. "Grandma Isa's diary? How beautiful," Caio. What kind of things did she write? Caio hesitated. He opened the notebook carefully, as if each page was a wound about to bleed again. She wrote everything. Absolutely everything. Including things that no one knew. Like what? Claire asked, curious. He stared at her. Then at Marina. Like, she had a great love in her life. It wasn't Lauro. The silence spread like black ink in a glass of milk. Marina lowered her eyes. Clara laughed nervously. What do you mean, Caio? Mommy loved Daddy. Yes, maybe she did. But the love of her life was Vinicius, her father's younger brother. She had an affair with him, Clara, for years. And she got pregnant with his child. Clara turned pale. Pregnant? Yes. She lost the baby. And then Vinicius disappeared. She never saw him again. Marina closed her eyes, as if listening to a story she already suspected. A tear ran down her face. I always knew there was something about her. Something that hurt. But she smiled so much, Caio. My God, she smiled so much to hide it all. Caio swallowed hard. There's more. More? Clara could barely speak. She wrote my father's name. Enrique's. On the last page. And she crossed it out. She crossed it out in anger. In pain. In fear. Maybe because my father wasn't Lauro's son. Maybe he was Vinicius' son. Clara stood up suddenly. Caio, stop it. This is sick. You're messing with things that should already be buried. Clara, I'm just trying to understand. I'm trying to give her a voice. She wrote it. She left it for someone to find. And it was me. My father was the pride of our family. You mean he was the fruit of adultery? That mom deceived us our entire lives. She didn't deceive. She survived. She loved someone and was prevented from living that love. She had to lie to keep her home, her family, her appearance. But inside her, Claire, there was another woman. One who screamed on paper because she couldn't speak out loud. Claire was crying now. Marina tried to comfort her, but she was also visibly shaken. And what do you want to do with all this, Caio? Marina asked in tears. Nothing. I don't want to destroy anyone. I just needed to share. You deserve to know who she really was. Because she wasn't just that sweet lady who made cheese bread. She was a woman. She was in love. She was betrayed by time. She was forgotten by life. Clara sat down again. Calmer. Her eyes were red. Do you know what hurts me the most? Is that I never knew who she really was. I lived next to her. I slept on her lap for years. And so, I didn't know. I only saw what she let me see. Caio nodded. I think that's why she wrote. Because she needed to be heard. Even if it was after her death. There was a long silence. Only the sound of the clock on the wall filled the air. Marina then spoke, looking at her hands. Maybe we need to thank you. And her. Because now, we can remember the whole Isadora. Not just the part that smiled. But also the part that cried. Caio stood up, walked to one of the shelves, and picked up the photograph of a young Isadora. He placed it on the table between them. This one was the woman who loved the impossible. Who kept secrets to protect us all. Who lost a child. Who perhaps raised another without being able to tell the truth. And who, even so, was the light in our lives. Now, she can rest. And on that Sunday, at that table that had so often been the scene of lies served at lunch, finally, the truth was served. With tears, but also with the beginning of a new understanding. Caio returned to writing at night. Today, the truth broke the silence. And even though it hurt, it set us free. My grandmother was heard. And our family, perhaps for the first time, truly saw each other. And I, the diary, felt that my mission was close to ending. Time passed as it always does. But in Isadora's house, something had changed forever. The attic, once filled with silence and dust, was now a sanctuary. Caio organized the boxes, cleaned the old furniture, hung the photographs he had found along the way, and in the center of it all, he placed a small table with a chair, and on it, me. The diary. Open to the first page, with a dried flower between the pages. The truths had been told, the pain had been shared, and now all that remained was what always comes after a storm, the silence that heals. Claire returned home a few weeks later. She had a different kind of weariness in her eyes, no longer that of denial, but that of someone who was learning to forgive. I was angry, Caio. Very angry. At myself, at her, at everyone. But then I dreamed about her. And she told me, I did the best I could, daughter. And then I understood. Caio smiled, touching his aunt's shoulder gently. She did the best she could, Clara. And look what she built. Look at us here. We are the fruits of her courage, even if it was silent. Do you believe that my father was Venetia's son? I believe he was the son of her love. And that, for me, is enough. Clara laughed through her tears. My brother was really different. Maybe that's why. Maybe he carried something in his chest that he didn't even know existed. But I can love him even more. Because he came from a beautiful place, even if it was forbidden. The following week, Caio organized a small gathering in the garden of the house. He invited some close relatives, old neighbors, and lured, who now seemed lighter. He spread photos of Isadora, wild flowers, and left an empty bench next to the larger portrait of her, as if inviting people to stay. Late in the afternoon, he stood up with the diary in his hands and said aloud, "This house has heard many silences. Silences that protected, but also suffocated. Today, I want to thank the woman who wrote these pages, who loved us so zealously, who carried pain alone so that we could smile, who was strong, but who was also afraid, who loved and lost, and who still continued." Everyone was silent, listening as if they were listening to their own soul. My grandmother, Isadora, was much more than we thought. And now we are more too, because knowing the truth gives us the chance to start over. Lured, moved, approached Caio and took the diary with trembling hands. She asked me to burn this, but I waited. And today, I know I did the right thing. Because some stories shouldn't be erased. They should be passed on. Marina, with wet eyes, held the hand of her little granddaughter, who had never met Isadora, but listened to everything with the attention of someone who understands with her heart. She was my mother at heart, Marina said. And now, she is the soul of our family. Caio ended the meeting with a phrase that had been echoing in his mind since the beginning of that journey. Love can be forbidden, hidden, torn on a page, but when it's true, it finds a way to blossom, even if it's decades later. At night, alone in the room, he looked at me one last time. He ran his fingers over the worn blue cape as if saying goodbye. And he wrote, "You are not just a diary. You are the bridge between pain and forgiveness, between silence and voice. You are what my grandmother needed to carry on. And now, it is my turn to carry on for her." He carefully closed me up. He wrapped me in a white handkerchief and put me back in the old box, but this time with respect, with affection, with love. Before turning off the light, he looked in the mirror and saw something new in himself, peace. And I, the diary forgotten in the attic, could finally rest. Because now, everything was said, everything was felt, everything was forgiven.